Good morning, everyone. My guest today is a father, a partner, and a friend. He's been a voice for those who have felt unheard. He's a linguist, a mathematician, and a steward. Above all, though, the description that I like the best is David Martin is a man awake. David, thank you so much for engaging again today.
Lovely to be here again, Pat.
Awesome. Over the last 18 months or so, we've had a couple of conversations and we've talked about polar opposites and in particular humour and our humanity. And today I'm led back to a conversation that we had perhaps 6 months ago, and an expression you came through with around grief and an interpretation of grief, and I guess a different model for looking at that, and that really intrigued me. So I know for years I was a nurse, and so 16 years, and dealing with a lot of people moving through grieving processes. And then back in 2004, I started a grieving program, very much a boutique workshop designed to help people with creative release of all the emotions that surround grief. And in particular, my intent was to help people find joy when it appeared there was none. And that's often a place people don't seem to be able to get to. Although I have seen some incredible shifts in the last 20 years around people being less stuck in the grieving process, and less, freed up, I think, to come to a higher place and to come to that place very quickly. Someone I worked with recently had a lot of pretty dreadful things happen, and in about 6 weeks she came to a place of compassion and forgiveness. She still had some more grieving to do, but she truly was able to sit in that place, and I just marveled at that because I thought it's quite new in terms of our evolving selves and how we're expressing. So perhaps you would share with us, I'll hold this up and it probably won't be particularly well visible, but when we last talked, you did this amazing sketch, and I'll put it on the video so viewers can see that in my mind a bit about what grief could look like. So can you open the conversation on that?
Well, yeah, I think that one of the challenges that we have, and certainly it is very reinforced in our social memes. So the good news is that people should feel very comfortable having a rather conventional view of things, is that far and away, we have a highly refined sense of experiencing the world and taking the experiences we have in the world and putting ourselves in the middle of those experiences as though they are happening to us. We are notorious for a egocentric, if you want to use that term, or a self-centered view. And ironically, in many instances, the people who most vigorously oppose the notion that they are self-centered or selfish many times have sublimated their identity to the point where they actually build some very elaborate pictures about how wonderful their efforts are in the world and how maybe little they're appreciated or how much they are victimized, et cetera, et cetera. So we have this very elaborate scheme going on. And as a result of that scheme, the scheme leads down the pathway of saying that life and trauma and experiences that are potentially viewed as negative are somehow directed towards us. And when we spoke last, Pat, one of the things that I tried to open up is the possibility that, like with every other form of energy, and remember, if we think of classic physics, energy just is. It's stuff that moves through time and space and dimension. It just is. The good or the bad, the how we call it something, is a phenomenon of naming things that is quite a unique human impulse, but it's not something that is intrinsic to the energy itself. And what I suggested was that in this situation of grief, most of the time, what grief is a bit of a capacitor that has actually built a charge within us over a period of time, where some ideal that we have held around a person or experience or expectation has a unintended terminus in our narrative of the world. We see how the world's going to play out. And all of a sudden, that gets punctuated. Someone dies, someone gets sick, somebody leaves, a relationship ends, et cetera, et cetera. And rather than seeing the energy, we narrate a story. And the story we narrate is we have been hurt, we have been harmed, we have been wrong, some ideal condition hasn't been met. But if we can take a step back for a moment and just say, let's just look at the energy. Let's just watch the energy flow. Let's not name it anything. Let's not put anything on it. The question becomes, what else could we experience the exact same energy as? And as I discussed with you, I came up with a little, a bit of an acrostic, but the core of that was to say that if what we saw when we felt that energy that we currently name grief, if we saw it for a different impulse or a different expression in our lives, we could see that maybe what we explore and experience as grief is actually an invitation. And it's an invitation to reflect on some form of gratitude or a gratitude response that for whatever reason hasn't been entirely fulfilled. So I'll give you a very simple example. If a person dear to me has passed away and I feel a sense of loss, if we're very, very, very deeply objective about the experience, I'm actually not feeling that their heartbeat missing on the earth is the problem, that their breathing is, or the absence of their breathing is the problem. What I'm identifying is my problem, which is I didn't finish my business with the closure or the expressions I wish or I might have had with that individual. And what I'm feeling is the pain of the incompleteness of my experience. Now I project it on the person who in my metaphor has passed on. What I haven't done is I haven't reflected on the fact that maybe what this was a reminder to trigger in my brain an opportunity to say, wow, I really miss that person, but what I miss is the incomplete nature of the expressions of love and fulfillment and gratitude that I had for that individual, and now I'm living in a space where I no longer have the ability to fulfill that. All of a sudden, it's not my grief from your loss, it's actually my awakening to be reminded to be grateful for the expressions and the interactions and the relationships I have in the moment. Now, this is not making lemonade out of lemons. It's actually giving an impulse and energy the opportunity to just narrate a different response. And so what I like to do when I think about anything we name, whether we name grief or we name anger or we name separation, we name any of these things, I like to take just that lens of social filtering called language away from it for a moment and just say, is it something else too? When we do that, Pat, what we do is we open up a more equanimical space where each one of us can experience without judgment, both our own and that which we place on others, and have a more reflective and potentially more appropriate interaction around the events that happen, not happen to us.
Mm. Yes. And that's a new distinction, I think, for us, because for a long time we've, I know for myself, I've come through, a whole raft of experiences, and they happened to me.
Right.
Yeah, that was my appreciation of it. So shifting, this is almost like becoming, the phrase I would use is becoming the observer.
Well, in a way, yes. But probably observer is a bit too dispassionate and potentially too third person.
Yep.
You are very much an actor in your ecosystem. You are very much part of that which influences what is in fact around you. So one of the things I like to do is use physical chemistry as a metaphor, where I talk about each one of us having energy valences. We connect with things. Things connect to us. These are just the nature of being the organic material that we are, and then more deeply, the kind of the metaphysical material that we are. We have charges, we attract certain things, we repel certain things. These are just the nature of how any system works. But I think it's important for us to stay present enough, not to just passively observe, but take the step of saying, in the active participation in my life, have I fully expressed love? Have I fully expressed joy? Have I fully expressed gratitude? Have I fully expressed everything I would like to have shared or expressed? And if I have, then the likelihood is exceptionally high that in fact I will not experience the sense of loss or grief the way I will if I have not done that. That doesn't mean that there isn't the moment where you'd love to share a laugh with the person who's no longer sitting next to you. Those are just lovely experiences of humanity. But the irony is, if you've completed the journey of making sure you see yourself as an active participant in the ecosystem you inhabit, then when you think of the person, so for me right now, I think of my dear friend, Robert Printable, who passed a few years ago. And what I love to do is, when I think about him and his passing, I many, many, many times have experiences where I go, I bet Robert would laugh his butt off if he heard this, right? Rather than wishing Robert was there, what this new perspective allows is the opportunity to share the laugh with a memory of a person's joviality and his sense of humor, and in his case, a very raw and very dry and somewhat sarcastic sense of humor. But the beautiful thing is, now rather than saying, I wish he was still in my ecosystem, I'm actually acknowledging he is in my ecosystem. His energy, his essence, that which made him an imprint on my life is still present. So I'm missing maybe the geometry and the form that he inhabited, but I'm not missing him. His imprint is very much with me, and so I have those impulses. Once again, didn't happen to me, but happened, and I'm impacted. I am, influenced. I am affected, and that's all fine, but it's not a victim statement. It's a participant statement.
Yeah. Yeah. That's even listening to you now, there's a level of responsibility goes with what you're saying. I've been talking for probably the last 20 years about wanting to support people to be fully self-expressed. So this is, you know, one aspect that you're moving into. You know, the whole thing of did I love, did I matter? So that's more self-reflecting. Then about showing up and engaging with others, and that whole notion of presence.
Well, and how beautiful it is, even this conversation that takes place across a lovely, magical digital signal across, you know, thousands of miles. What is beautiful is that you have an impulse to reach out that's triggered off of an echo of a conversation that we had. That echo bounces off of a wall called the cave wall of me. That echo reminds me of the joy of that conversation and the delight that we had in sketching things out and doing all kinds of other wonderful elements of the discussion. But what happens is that by having this entire enlivening of each moment, we won't have missed anything, right? We didn't miss the first conversation. We're not missing this conversation. And if we're done with this conversation, or if we come back to it, all that we'll be doing is building on the fullness of the complete experience of the moment. This moment will in and of itself be complete, just like that one was.
Yes.
But you have an impulse that leads you to echo that energy, which then triggers me to reflect on our conversation, and then enables both of us to share the conversation, which we had between us with now potentially a much larger group as we start to build this out and reflect. No one at any point in that process was missing something. We have just recontextualized and compressed time into this wonderful series of full presence moments, each one of them being entirely complete.
Mm. Mm. And I think, you know, you're arousing for me that whole thing of missing somebody, even if they're actually here. Yeah, they haven't left the planet. That notion of missing them, and it can become pining. And you know, that longing. So, you know, it's the same thing. I remember addressing a group of people through a fertility association. So people in the room all didn't have children, but wanted to have children. So they were experiencing this grief for something that hadn't arrived. And you know, I was able to demonstrate, I think, about a range of things that would have given them about an 18% extra chance of improving their ability to conceive. And sowing those seeds in that environment, very much coming from the positive psychology, good humour, you know, just enhancing your full range of well-being. And, you know, the studies that have proven that certain things can happen. And then taking into account environmental things that can detract, you know, the toxic chemicals, etc. And I often think back to that day, and I had somebody sing to close off my session, and she sang that gorgeous song, When a Child is Born. And, you know, for me, there was that curious mix of pleasure and pain, the beauty of her voice as she could, you know, sing and express knowing who was in the room, and, you know, the element of sadness that was there as well. But it was a glorious moment. Just
right.
Mm.
Well, it's fascinating to me. I think that the challenge that many of us struggle with, and I know I can share a personal experience. I had the opportunity to move through with a very individual experience, which was a extremely catastrophic accident that I just marked the anniversary of, the 31st anniversary of what was an accident that resulted in my legs largely being unusable for several years, me being in a wheelchair, never supposed to walk again, me dealing with pain ever since that day, and it has never abated. And I've often been asked, how did I deal with that whole process of accepting, going through kind of the classic steps of what you're supposed to, right? The approved response to something happening to you. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is, I didn't go through the 7 stages or the 5 stages or the 10 stages or anything else. I was just a shit. Right out of the gate, that's what I was. I was miserable. I was frustrated. I came out of a very religious environment, so I was very interested in figuring out what deep, sinister plot was being unraveled by some sort of, very angry God somewhere. And so I had all of that programming in place. And so my first response was actually, I wouldn't even give it any credit for being elegant or sophisticated or anything else. It was just me being generally miserable. That's me. And it wasn't until actually close to 15, 16 years in it, where I was able to spend time with a dear friend in China who told me that I needed to see that moment of my injury as the best moment of my life. Mm-hmm. And I laughed at him and I said, "You're a fool. I've had 2 beautiful children. I've had wonderful business success. I've done all sorts of things in the world, tons of things that go way up on the list of really, really amazing and wonderful and cool. So I know what good is, and this will never be that." That was my response to him. And it was funny because that night I fell asleep. I was very angry when I fell asleep. I was incensed by the notion that somehow or another he would tell me that this was going to be seen one day as the best thing that happened to me. And I was just growling when I fell asleep. And I was angry when I fell asleep. And I kept being angry while I was sleeping. And about 2:30 in the morning, between 2:30 and 3 in the morning, I sat up in bed and I kind of cursed the darkness. And I said, the only thing that would make this the best thing that happened to my life is that I get to put my legs back in joint every morning. It's the most painful thing I ever do. And I have to stand up for the very first time. And I have to be conscious of standing for the very first time. And it's like a lightning bolt hit me, Pat, right in that moment. And I realized I'm the only person I know who is reminded to be grateful for the first step I take out of bed every day, because it's my choice. By the way, that's not acceptance. That is an entire reprogramming of a worldview that says the accident didn't happen to me. I was part of a series of physical laws that include gravity and velocity and motion and ice underneath sand when I was long jumping into a pit that had ice under the sand, and my legs ripped apart because physics happens. There is a very rapid force. It hits a very immovable object. Something's going to move. It happened to be my legs, and my legs ripped apart. But what an amazing thing to realize that from that day to this morning, I am reminded with no exception on every day that the first decision I get to make is I'm going to stand. You know what's amazing about that is me cursing the darkness that night opened up a portal that is so luminous that my irritating positivity is incapable of being suppressed now, because what lit in me in that moment was this entire notion that, hold on a minute, I have a reminder daily of my decision to live, my decision to walk, my decision to stand. Those are mine. They're not somebody else's. And I now can see that over the last 31 years, what an amazing gift. What an amazing gift to be given the opportunity to take on a daily reminder that says your first greatest challenge is stepping first on tentative legs every morning and knowing that you can stand. What an amazing thing. And so I challenge people who think that you somehow have to some form of acquiesce to the inertia of the story that says, well, at some point you'll just have to embrace it and accept the pain. The truth is, I didn't have to embrace and accept it. I had to let the energy of it be a constant reminder for gratitude, a constant reminder to say, be grateful. And I encourage people who are struggling through the conventional narrative of grief or sorrow or loss to take a step and say, what are you grateful for? Are you grateful for love? Are you grateful for family? Are you grateful for connection? Are you grateful for your breath in your life? Are you genuinely grateful? Because it's not about that it happened to me. It's about you're in the story. But now it's about making that story a story you're proud of, you're glad to speak about, you're glad to share with others. That's what it's about.
Yeah. You made, I don't know when you made up the acronym, but your acronym for grief is a gratitude reminder in emotional form.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but and that's and fast forward to the most present version of a similar story. I went through a process of recognizing that a relationship that I had maintained for an exceptionally long time was naturally coming to its own divergence. Now, in my world, I held on to things, and I held on to them with a tenacity that actually strangled things. That's who I am. I'm a holder honor kind of person. Okay? That relationship actually needed to transform. But the transformation could only come when I recognized that I was preserving an illusion of an unfulfilled narrative where I had failed to communicate all of my expectations, all my desires, all my needs to a person, and had projected on that person a sense of unfulfillment. But the truth is that if I were to go down the pathway of grief, I would say I lost a relationship. But the truth is that if we really carefully examine that particular experience, what we can also see, once again, just taking that one step back and holding equanimity, is I was projecting onto another human being a set of expectations for them to fulfill something that was never theirs to fulfill.
Yeah.
Now, did I have emotions? Absolutely. Did I have that impulse that said, oh, it's happening to me? Yes, of course I had it. I have those impulses. But what each one of these moments are, and the reason why I have that wonderful little acrostic so that we can actually understand grief in a different way, gratitude reminder in emotional form, what it's doing is it's saying, what am I grateful for? And you know what? All of a sudden, I spent 100 days, no kidding, for 100 days, I said, I'm going to reprogram my story of a 30-year relationship. And every single day for 100 days in a row, I'm going to write something about that individual for which I'm grateful. And you know what I did? I shared it with them. What did that do? It was a gratitude reminder in emotional form that actually reprogrammed my response and simultaneously emancipated this individual from a sense of burden or failure or anything else that could have come. So by using the energy that's in the system, by being reminded that this impulse, which says, oh, it's happening to me. Yes, it is. But what's happening to you is you're being reminded there is something for which you are grateful and you're not expressing it. So express it.
Yes. Yes. In the illustration that you drew and shared last time we spoke, you drew some, well, positive and negatively charged aspects of various elements. And one of them was sensitivity, and across the line on the other side was permission to disengage. Can you
Yes.
on that?
Yeah, so the story I just relayed is a beautiful example. I think an enormous number of people, and probably most of the people that you reach out to and you speak to, are by either definition or by practice relatively sensitive. Their goal is to be aware of their environment, to be aware of their impact, to hopefully be aware of themselves. Those are all things that are exceptionally, exceptionally important. So on the one hand, we like to put a positive spin on sensitivity, which, by the way, can be both positive and negative. We can be sensitive to very positive things. We can also be hypersensitive to very negative things. So sensitivity is neither good nor bad. But the permission to disengage is actually quite important, because the polar opposite of sensitivity is the ability to say, this narrative, this person, this relationship, this experience has served and no longer serves. Right? Not trying to reprogram something, just simply saying that's enough. Now, one of the tough things is when we say that's enough. We often put ourselves into the mindset that says, oh my gosh, if I disengage, what will happen? So maybe I'm the one that's the glue that holds my family together. And if I don't hold the family together, the family will fall apart. Well, let's play that one out for a minute. If that is in fact the case, then there wasn't a family. So the permission to disengage comes in two forms. One is to disengage from your own story, which says, I'm the glue, I'm the glue, I'm the glue, which is a story that may have served for its purpose, but it's maybe time to let that story go. If when the glue goes, something else emerges, that's probably what was there all the time. And what you were doing in that glue story was actually trying to build something that was not authentic to the actual lived experience of everyone else. Ironically, enormous numbers of people have a breakthrough when they've told themselves they're the glue that holds something together. They actually see that the minute they let go, what's happened is things reorganize, but they organize. It doesn't fall all the way apart. It just looks different. And so what I like to encourage people to do is when they're sensitive, don't think that your hyper relevance is so important that if you stop feeling, if you stop sensing, if you stop telling yourself your own story, that somehow or another the cosmos will fall apart. The answer is no, it won't. And what you will see is you will see where your sensitivity in many instances has actually been most deficient around your own value, your own well-being, your own sense of identity and purpose. Because most people who would describe themselves as hypersensitive would also be equally guilty of holding on to an identity that is in fact always playing down their well-being. I'm going to invite people over because it's good for them, but I'm going to be hosting, I'm going to have to clean up, I'm going to have to, right? Whoa, hold on a minute, right? In those moments, it's a great idea to take a step back and say, whose story is this story? And can I be sensitive and include me and my well-being inside of that sensitivity? Because the minute I ask that question, suddenly this giant veil gets ripped open and I start seeing, oh my goodness, I have suffered under the guise of sensitivity, and I have created an illusion that I'm desperately trying to hold under the guise of sensitivity, and I don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the other cross segments, and you've mentioned it before, the holding that nostalgic ideal, and then at the other end, indenture to loss.
Yes.
Tell me about that, please.
So I think that one of the challenges that we hold in tension is most of the narration of life happening to us. We actually don't reflect on who gave us the story that now seems to be broken. Okay? So many times, what we'll experience, particularly if the topic of grief is somewhere in the neighborhood, is that we will have a story that says someone should. They should have lived longer. They should have loved me more. I should have loved them more, blah, 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 right? Somewhere should is part of a sentence. And by the way, if you have grief, somewhere in the sentence before or after is the word should. But when we hear that word, we need to take a step back and say, oh, where did that come? Like when we came out of the womb, where in the user's manual did it tell us this is the way life should gonna happen? There wasn't a user's manual. We didn't get it. What happened was we started breathing and we started having a heartbeat. We started having a bunch of other things. Now, a lot of psychologists like to talk about the first separation being when the infant first leaves the body of the mother. Quite ironically, what they don't talk about is the first time that they experience being held, or being breastfed, or being loved, or being cared for, or being something else. They focus on the separation side of the story. They don't focus on the plurality of reattachments. And the problem with that is what I talk about this nostalgia or the story around loss. We have a pattern, and it is habituated in our society, where it's quite easy to talk about the what happened, the identity that we build around how long suffering we are or how we've overcome. If we look at Joseph Campbell's The Power of Myth, what is the unique driving story that allegedly underpins every metaphysical or existential narrative that we have in myth? And that is, someone has to suffer, someone has to go through loss, and their identity is forged in the fire of loss. Newsflash, that's a story. And that's just a story. It isn't life. Most of the time, your heart is beating. Most of the time, you're breathing. Most of the time, you are around people who roughly can tolerate you. Most of the time, you eat. Most of the time, you sleep. Most of the time, you bathe and have all of your body systems working. And rarely, truly rarely, do you have the other side of that story. But listen to anyone recount their life, and they will give you Joseph Campbell's Power of Myth.
Yes, yes.
They will not give you the terribly boring story of, yeah, my heart beat probably several 100,000 times today. And I probably breathed several tens of thousands of times a day. And I probably didn't even stop and think about any of those things happening. But man, if I had a cold, and if I couldn't breathe right, and if I had a little bit of an atrial fibrillation because I actually pushed a little too hard, that's the story you're going to hear. You're not going to hear the boring, monotonous story of goodness. You're going to hear the nostalgia of loss. So what we do is we need to take that step back and say, let's be calm, let's be measured, let's be thoughtful. And rather than telling that story of loss, let's start living the experience of abundant life.
Yeah. 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 Thank you for that. The one other parameter, and perhaps we'll do this one in closing. On one end of the scale was that emotion from a sense of harm or loss. And then on the other side, that comparator of scale and loss.
Yeah, so there's a beautiful, I believe it's Monty Python sketch, and I think it's Monty Python that did this, where you have a bunch of grumpy men in smoking jackets comparing how miserable their lives are, and they go back and forth, and it's somebody lived in a box on the road, and then somebody else, luxury. I had to eat hot coals on the road, and I had to walk barefoot up and down the road in the snow. And it's this beautiful joke, but they play out the one-upsmanship of how much people like to compare about life. Ask yourself how many times you've heard this statement, "I'm only human." Okay? And what that means is, I screwed up. Nobody compares on the other side. We don't outdo each other with gratitude. We don't outdo each other with abundance. We don't outdo each other with greatness. What we do is we outdo each other with this notion of the suffering that I went through. Now, in the evangelical and in the potentially original kind of Catholic sense of things in the Christian tradition, and certainly in many practices that ascribe some version of the Buddha and the Buddha's teaching, and certainly in the notion of many of the practices in Islam and other places, there is a notion that somehow or another we are here to suffer as some form of a refining process to somehow get to another version. So we have, regardless of the place of birth, we have an enormous number of stories that like to tell us that there is merit in being miserable. And by the way, sometimes the more miserable, the more merit, right? If you think about some of the extremes. I'm here to kind of call BS on that, right? The universe empirically shows us with blooming flowers, with breathing lungs, with beating hearts, that most of the time we actually are not suffering. Most of the time we're actually being provisioned. And we're being provisioned by things that are certainly autonomous and certainly not things we're putting our minds to controlling. Now, what that means is that as we go through an experience of understanding our own narrative, it's extremely instructive for us to get away from this notion that there is a merit base in suffering. Suffering is, like any other energy, our narrative of how we choose to tell our story. And in a moment, we can be trapped into the stories of the other.
Yes.
Somebody should have this, somebody should have that. I should have this, I should have that. But every time that happens, we are invited to take a step, just one step back, hit pause, and say, is the exact same energy here to remind us of something that we have overlooked in our gratitude? And the answer, Pat, is every single time that answer will be yes. We will always find something. I'm grateful that I had a sense of family that I could miss. I'm grateful that I've tasted love and it's gone. I'm grateful that I've had a privilege that now no longer I have. I'm grateful for those moments because it has given me the dynamic range of life, and the aperture of life has opened so that I could experience its ranges. And I'm grateful for that. That's not hard. That's not resolving and accepting a broken narrative. That's integrating a presence that we can all access every time we are reminded of gratitude in emotional form.
David, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm grateful.
Aren't we all?
You know, I was present at the launch of your documentary Future Dreaming in Auckland a couple of years back, and I'll leave a link at the close of this production. And at the time I talked to Kaya, the producer, and said one day I want to meet this man. And so we have. So putting that energy forward. But even bigger than that, I'm just really getting the timeliness of things. Sometimes there needs to be, as in this instance, some time has passed for me, and other things need to happen in order for me to be in a place to come back and have this deeper understanding of the conversation, with, for my own purposes, but also a very pure intent for, I want a better languaging, I want a better expression to be coming from me and those I associate with, to be creating a shift and opening people up to that. So thank you for today for doing that. I'll leave some references at the end in relation to how people can best connect with you through your website. Would that be the easiest way if someone wants?
Yeah, the best way to find me is at www.davidmartin.world.
Yes. Okay. Lovely. Again.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank you. We'll engage again.
Very good.
Bye for now.
Thanks.
I've been talking with Dr. David Martin, who was featured in the film Future Dreaming. I was present at the launch of that film in Auckland, New Zealand. Have subsequently met David since I arrived back here in Australia, and had the chance to engage with him on a number of occasions, and just so grateful, a bit of a catchphrase today, to be able to engage with this man and to adopt, if you like, and pick up on his language and have it enhance my own language and expression. And it's not that our language is wrong, but we've come through a conditioning and learning process, as David alluded to, and there's this new consciousness, this new thinking and new awareness and new appreciation for how we might view things, which will, I believe, put an end to our suffering. And it's not that we won't grieve and mourn, but we won't be trapped as we might have been in the past by the extremeness of that. So I so hope this has been useful. If you're really connected to this pathway, and if you're a coach or somebody supporting others to move through difficult times, to shift patterns, then this would have been very useful, I hope. So love to hear from you. Please do be in touch if you'd like to engage further. Thank you.